So this is about leadership. Leadership is very complex, and there are different ways in which different people define leadership because of the situations they have been, their prior experience, and the leadership styles that they have come across in their lives. And plus, of course, the most important from research. So leadership is a process by which an agent induces a subordinate to behave in a desired manner. So this is about the leader and the people who follows, the subordinates who follows, and this is about how a person provokes or a person induces the people who his or her followers to behave in a way that is desirable to the leader. Another way to define or look at leadership is directing and coordinating the work of group members. So you have the leader and a group of people who we refer to as the group members who direct, who gives you direction, and also an important part of leading is coordinating. So you direct as well as coordinate the people who you lead, and allow them to work in the direction that you want them to take. And also leadership is about interpersonal relationships or interpersonal relation in which others comply because they want to, not because they have to. So this is also an interesting definition that we have about leadership. So you ask interpersonal relationship that's between two or more people in which others comply. So you are doing what the leader is asking you to do because they want to, not because they have to. So these are some of the definitions of leadership. It's all about focusing on resources. It's all about creating those opportunities for the people that are following your followers. Okay, and also so important to create those conditions to make your group effective. So, and also you need to have a good plan to engage your employees, the people that are there to build the teams, your team with you, and also make sure that you're hiring the right kind of people so that you are able to achieve those results that you are looking for. Okay, leadership is all about problem solving. There was one incident where I came across a leader where in my previous work, he said to me that for me, it's all about problem solving. It's all about solving the problems of people. Okay. So I do think that if you have delegated the right kind of people at every level of the organization, it becomes less burdensome because they are able to take that leadership role at their level and able to solve the problems where you're not burdened with too much to handle at the highest level of the hierarchy. All right. Okay. So we also talked about some of you have talked about leaders and bosses previously. So we are going to differentiate between successful managers and effective managers. So your textbook differentiates these two types of managers. Successful managers. So successful managers are those who get promoted quickly through the ranks. Okay, they climb up the hierarchy so fast that it blows your mind. They're on top. They're really good talkers. Their oratorship is perfect. They have probably very excellent oratorships, more to the likes of a politician. Okay, they spend so much time organizing, socializing, and politicking. It means they are really extroverted people. They love socializing. They love talking. They are always out there. They are trying to build their what we call as the network. Okay, and people know them. And but however, these people are known to spend less time on the traditional management responsibilities, such as planning and decision making. You would have noticed these kind of managers as well if you have worked in an organization, and those are the people that people try to please most often. All right, and then we have the effective managers, and they are the ones who are actually making the real contribution to their organization's performance. Because of their effectiveness, they are able to do things right. They are also able to do things the way it's meant to be done, and not just by their blah blah blah. Okay, they are actually doing and making real contributions to their organization's performance. I'm sure you would have come across these two type of people in an organization as well, or in your real lives as well. Yes, you can have successful managers. To some extent it is important, but what we really need is those effective managers to make your organization grow. All right, now we are going to the next slide, and we are going to look at some of the characteristics of leadership. Now, a leader need to be both rational and emotional. Now, we have come across leaders who also works on only the rationalization factor, but this doesn't now work. It's emotional. We have to know and we have to understand that we deal with people. So when we deal with people, emotional aspects come into play. So a leader, in order to be effective, needs to be both rational as well as emotional. And that means that his actions or her actions should be influenced by both reason and logic and inspiration and passion. Okay, so so reason and logic and inspiration and passion, all these are important when it comes to being a good effective leader. Now we need to ensure that as leaders ourselves, we need to use rational techniques. So when we say rational techniques, what do we mean by rational techniques? Rational techniques means that which makes sense to people around you. Sometimes we come across people who makes these decisions, and sometimes they don't make sense to you as a group. And that's when there is miscommunication or when there is conflict. Rationality should be the basis of your leadership style, as well as emotional appeal to your influencers or to the people who are your followers. So you need to make sure that they are on a level with you when it comes to emotions as well, that they feel like you understand them on an emotional level as well. So these things are so important when it comes to a leader. Otherwise, they very soon people are going to vote you out, or they are going to have a problem with your leadership, and ultimately they are going to resign and quit and leave because they are unhappy because you didn't take care of their emotions or consider their emotional well-being. So when I say emotional well-being, it means that, as I said, you need to be your temperament need to be in place. You need to ensure that you are not shouting at them or treating them any less than a human being should be treated. They should be treated with respect and considering them and considering them most importantly as a human being, a person that needs to be respected. Okay, no matter the level of the hierarchy. All right. So then it's also important that when you talk to them, when you talk to your followers, or when you as a leader talk to your group or team, that you evoke in them feelings of you can either evoke feelings of positivity or negativity. So it could either be constructive or destructive. You need to be very careful as a leader to ensure that your criticism even is delivered on a constructive note. Okay, so it cannot be where you are knowingly or unknowingly destroying the people in your team. Okay, you can give negative feedback to a person, but there's a way to do it. So that is what it means. It need to feel, you need to make sure and ensure that you are delivering that news, or you are delivering that criticism in a constructive manner. So now we are going to look at some of the leadership myths. Okay, leadership, something that you believe to be true but not necessarily true. It's something that a lot of people tend to think that it's true, because it's a myth. It's not really true. It's not based on evidence. It's not based on research. It's just something that people say. So there are a lot of myths that come into play when it comes to leadership as well. So one of the most common leadership myths is people believe that good leadership is all common sense. It's not just about common sense. It's very ambiguous. What may be common sense to me may not be common sense to you, and vice versa. And it's not really definite. Okay, it's very, very vague. It's not right to say that it's just common sense, good leadership. If everything was based on common sense, we wouldn't have any problems then, isn't it? So this is a very big myth that we have. Leadership is just based on common sense. No, it's not. It is it's about a mixture of a lot of things. It's not only common sense, and you cannot base the definition of leadership based only on this aspect. Also hear this so often, and this is leaders are born and not made. Okay, again, it's a myth. You cannot have leaders that are just, they are born with the leadership. Yes, of course, there are some people who, based on their personality, there are people who are more extrovert, people who are more expressive, people who have more better oratorship skills, people who are natural talkers, natural speakers, and things like that. But all those things are there, but there is also that component of leadership that requires you to have advanced education in specialized fields. You need to know those things to what makes you to be a good leader. It's not just about you being born as a leader. Okay, so that is important as well. So if somebody comes to you and tells you that leaderships are born and not made, you completely disagree with this, because research does not evidence this. Okay, so yes, as I said, there is a genetic component to it, of course, but that it is combined with your education in a specialized field as well. So those skills and trainings that you need to become a good leader, especially in this time and ages where there's so much diversity, and you need to understand people that from different perspectives, different cultures, different backgrounds. You need to have that education underlying your leadership skills in order to be an effective. There's a lot of people who also believe that you need to have, like the street skills in order to be a good leader. So you need to have it the hard way. You need to, be out there, learn about it from life experiences, had a hard life, and then only you kind of become a good leader. No, definitely it's not true. As I said, yes, experiential learning, your experiences matter, but your formal study is also equally important. So leadership has to be learned as well as experience. So those two things come together hand in hand. Only about you having a hard life, having a hard time, and going through hard experiences in life, and then you become naturally a leader. Yes, maybe you would have acquired some leadership skills based on those kind of experiences you might have gone through in life, having hardships. But it's important to know that formal study is also equally important for you to have a well-rounded and effective leader.
On October 13th, 1972, a plane carrying 45 passengers, including an entire professional rugby team, crashed in the Andes Mountains between Chile and Argentina. There was no way the survivors could have known it at the time, but their nightmare had only just begun. Their story has been called the Miracle of the Andes, on account of the incredible odds the survivors of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 had to overcome to make it home. Today, we're going to take a look at the true story behind the movie Alive and the crash of Uruguayan Flight 571 in the Andes. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other unbelievable survival stories you would like to hear about. Excuse me, everybody, this is your captain. Okay, brace yourself. We're going to the Andes. The rugby team aboard Flight 571 wasn't terribly alarmed when the pilot told them they were about to encounter some turbulence. They were en route to a match in Chile, and most had their minds on the coming game. But at least one of the passengers, a 19-year-old medical student named Roberto Canessa, recalls someone near him asking, "Aren't we flying too close to the mountains?" Moments later, his fear was realized when the plane hit the side of a mountain. The crash was later attributed to an error made by the pilot. While still flying high amongst the Andes Mountains, the pilot turned north to begin the descent into Santiago, Chile. But the peaks were still too high where they were. Realizing his mistake, the pilot attempted to increase the altitude by tilting the plane nearly fully vertical, which caused the plane to stall. The engine sputtered and the plane descended, and that's when it hit the mountain. Dr. Roberto Canessa would eventually write the book, I Had to Survive, How a Plane Crash in the Andes Inspired My Calling to Save Lives, in which he would detail exactly how he felt after the plane hit the mountain. He reported that his body lurched forward upon impact and he immediately struck his head. His first thought was that his life was about to end. He held on tight to his seat and he began to pray. Someone nearby yelled, "Please God, help me, while another person shouted that he was blind. When Canessa looked over at the screaming passenger, he saw that the man's brain was literally spilling out of his head. When the plane finally came to a stop, all of the seats pushed forward toward the cockpit like a row of dominoes. The smell of jet fuel and the sounds of screaming filled the air. The crash split the fuselage of the plane wide open. It broke apart and the tail was nowhere in sight. The rugby team, along with their friends and family who had been aboard the flight, found themselves stranded, surrounded by snow-capped mountains in the midst of a raging blizzard. After the crash, the team gathered whatever food and warm clothes they could find in the wreckage. Convinced that a rescue mission would arrive quickly, they took their empty suitcases and used them to make a cross on the ground that they believed would be easily visible from the sky. They also used their footsteps to carve an SOS message in the snow for planes that might be flying overhead. On the second day, they heard both a jet and a smaller plane fly over them. Both times, the survivors became elated, feeling sure that a rescue was imminent. But day after day came and went with no sign of help. Flight 571 took off with 45 people aboard. 12 of those perished in the crash, and 5 more succumbed to their injuries within hours. Another person died 1 week later from injuries sustained in the crash. And on the 17th day, disaster struck again. A sudden avalanche swept over the crash site, where another 8 people met their demise. The survivors lacked food, which made starvation their #1 concern. However, they were also trapped at an altitude of 11,800 feet, which meant that their second biggest problem was the unrelenting freezing temperatures. To stay alive, the survivors of Flight 571 had to get clever. To get drinking water, they used a section of aluminum from one of the plane seats to melt the snow. They also needed to stay warm, so they disassembled all of the wool seat covers to form blankets. Walking around in the deep snow wasn't easy, so they figured out they could use seat bottoms as snowshoes. They used the fuselage as shelter, and to block the cold air from getting inside, they packed suitcases into the open spaces. Sunglasses were fabricated from plastic that was found in the pilot's cabin. Hammocks were constructed for people with broken legs, and sleeping bags were made from insulation pulled from the plane's kitchen. When it came to bodily functions, the survivors would urinate into rugby balls, because if they tried to do it outside in the snow, their urine would freeze. Roberto Canessa, just a young medical student at the time, used his nascent skills to nurse the injured. He drained fluids and stabilized fractured bones. He also assumed responsibility for moving the corpses, a job some couldn't bring themselves to do. In an interview with National Geographic, Dr. Canessa later reflected on the ingenuity of the survivors, saying that, "You get very smart when you are dying." It was 9 days after the crash that the food ran out. The land around the crash site had no vegetation, and there were no animals at that altitude either, so hunting or foraging was out of the question. With nothing to sustain them, it was only a few days before they were all feeling the symptoms of starvation. The survivors were aware that if they waited too long to eat, they would be too weak to survive. They were also aware that the bodies of the deceased passengers lay preserved in the packed snow, not too far from the fuselage. It didn't take long to realize what the only option really was. Many of the survivors resisted, and some of them prayed to God, asking for guidance as to whether or not they should resort to eating their fellow passengers and teammates. There was plenty of discussion among the team, but in the end, starvation led to action. As a medical student, Roberto Canessa knew that human tissue contains proteins and fat, like any other kind of meat. He knew that it would be sufficient for sustaining the starving survivors, and as the closest thing they had to a doctor, he felt confident about being the first to cut into one of the corpses. In his memoir, Canessa would later write about the mental barrier he encountered when he tried to eat his friend. For him, it was one thing to know at an intellectual level that you were hungry and needed food to live. But it was another thing entirely to know that the so-called food in one's hand is from the body of a loved one. The experience for the survivors was, needless to say, unbelievably stressful. Canessa used a shard of glass to slice into the first body, and each survivor took a piece, forcing themselves to consume it on the spot. Every survivor except one. Coche Inciarte initially refused to take part, as he could not stomach the idea. Eventually, though, even he gave in and ate to stay alive. Technically speaking, what the survivors did is not cannibalism per se. That term usually refers to the devious means in order to consume a person. What the survivors did is actually known as anthropophagy. Despite the pedantics, the survivors realized the severity of their actions and vowed to consider it a sacred act. Of the then 10 remains they had, they deemed 3 of them off limits. Those were the bodies of Fernando Parrado's mother and sister and Javier Methal's nephew. All of the survivors had serious difficulties committing to the idea of eating another human being. To come to grips with the situation, Canessa and the others reasoned that if the situation was reversed, they would want their own bodies to be used for food. Canessa felt the act of eating another person connected the two physically and spiritually. With all in agreement, the survivors vowed that if they themselves perished, they would willingly donate themselves so the others could live. During the avalanche that hit on the 17th day, the frozen bodies that the team were living off of were all swept away. However, the avalanche also resulted in the loss of 8 additional passengers. The survivors once again faced an agonizing decision. Should they consume their friends, who only hours earlier had been living and breathing? After more discussion, Canessa and the others once again decided to do what they must to survive, and they fed off the newly lost passengers. Though they were stranded, the team wasn't totally cut off from the outside world. They used a transistor radio to hear about the search efforts being made to find them. But on October 23, 1972, they heard some gravely distressing news. After over 100 attempts to locate the crashed plane, the authorities were calling off the search. The survivors realized that if they were going to make it home, they would have to get help themselves. Soon afterwards, Canessa, Nando Parrado, and Antonio Tintin Vicentin set out on a hike to find rescue. They reached the top of the mountain, but once they got there, they realized they were still far from finding safety. Tintin was sent back to the plane so that Canessa and Parrado could better divide their meager food rations. At night, they endured sub-zero temperatures, but after 10 days of walking, they reached a spot that had grass and water, and they suddenly felt confident that they were going to survive. Canessa and Parrado hiked 10 days and 44 miles before they finally found someone who could help them. It was 70 days after the initial crash when they finally emerged back into civilization. The two then led authorities to the crash site, where the rest of the survivors were saved. Considering their severe malnutrition and the incredibly dangerous terrain they walked across, Canessa and Parrado's feat was nothing short of astonishing. On December 22, 1972, 2 helicopters were sent to find the survivors still living in the plane wreckage. 6 were immediately flown home, but 8 others had to wait until the next day due to poor weather conditions. The rescue made all the headlines, but reactions quickly shifted from joyous amazement to shock and disgust when word got out about what the team had to do to survive. It wasn't until the survivors were able to express their own hesitations about their actions and describe the spiritual battle that ensued over the decision that the public was swayed to support them. Especially troubling was that the church took issue with the survivors' actions. However, once they explained that they had treated the consumption of their friends as an act of communion, the church absolved them of their sins. After the rescue, Canessa set out to meet the parents of all those who had perished. He took them the letters the dead had written before they passed away. He felt strongly about telling the survivors' side of the story and making sure the circumstances of their plight were well understood. Canessa knew how taboo what they had done was, and he believed no one would be more outraged than those of the families of the deceased. But in the end, he found he was met with understanding and forgiveness from the families of the victims. They all seemed to understand living was more important than anything else.
This researcher who formally recognized the importance of the leader is actually Fred Fiedler. Okay, more often or not, people nowadays they go to Hollander's transactional approach to leadership when they talk about leadership. And even in your textbook, most of the time they have referred to this, and they have come up, the authors of your book have come up with this framework called the Interactional framework, which has taken a lot of stuff from Hollander's transactional approach to leadership. Basically, this leadership talks about three important components. That's in any situation which requires leadership, there is three important components that are involved. That is, of course, you need a leader who is the most important, I think. And of course, there cannot be leadership that can be exhibited without your followers. So you need to have followers as well, people that you are leading, isn't it? Your team, basically. And leadership also requires you to have the situation in which you are going to put across your leadership skills or strategies or qualities. So there are three important things that are involved in the interactional framework for analyzing leadership: the leader, the followers, and the situation. Okay. Now, I came across this really, really interesting video, and I thought I should share with you all. We'll be touching upon the followers. So they have specified different kinds of people. Kelly, he suggests five basic styles of followership. Okay, so you can go through these. It's similar to the video that you just saw, just except that these are people, they have given different kinds of names for it. For example, he calls people different types of followers. He classifies them as alienated followers. Okay, people who are very negative, people who are always thinking, they know everything, and but at the same time, when somebody's trying to do something, they're very negative about it. Okay, the cynicals, basically. And then you have the conformist followers, who are the yes people in the organization, and they are very dangerous too. Okay, because if dangerous if their orders contradicts the societal standards that they uphold or believe in. So they are the conformist followers. Then you have the pragmatic followers as well. The pragmatic followers are rarely committed to their group circles, but they have not learned to make waves. Okay, so they are kind of like quiet. They don't give their best. They tend to be mediocre workers, and but they may become experts in mastering the bureaucratic rules. Okay, that can be used to protect them. So, and then Kelly also talks about the passive followers. We see a lot of passive followers in organizations these days too. They let all the thinking be done by the leader, and they lack enthusiasm. They're just there, okay, and they don't take initiative or sense of responsibility, and they're very passive, okay. And most of the time, leaders sees these people as incompetent or lazy, or even stupid at times. And now, what we need to look at is when we are hiring people, the effective followers, as we just saw in the video, or the exemplary followers, as Kelly calls them. So these are the people who present a very consistent picture. They are genuine. They are what they are, but they are who they say they are. Okay, they do not try to mismatch the kind of person they are. They're genuine, and they are dependable. Okay, they present the same person to your leader, the co-worker. Okay, they don't have these separate masks that they show to different people, and they are willing to stand up, show innovation, and willing to stand up to their superiors. Okay, and they are able to apply their talent to the benefit of the organization. And even when there is bureaucracy or red tape that is stopping them from coming up, they are able to confront those things of course in the right manner, and not stay passive. So these are the exemplary followers. As I said, these are the most effective followers, or the most effective team of people that you could have in your team or in your organization. When you have effective leaders who have effective followers, that's when it works really well. And they are the people who are the effective leaders would appreciate the work that is done by these exemplary followers. They are essential to any organization's success. So there are different ways This is important in the hiring stage itself, where you are making those decisions to have effective or exemplary followers in your team in order for your organizational success.